Hey, what's up guys? It's been a while since I made a video and that's because I'm a daddy now. But I think the one I have today is going to be super cool. So let's get started.
Guess who's back again.
Cool, so in today's video, basically what I want to create is a URL shortener. So you put in a URL and then you get a slug back, which is like 4 characters long. And then when you hit our endpoint with the short, like the short slug, you get redirected to a longer URL. Simple enough. Let's get started. So the first thing I want to do is create a directory and I'm going to call it short URL. And then I'm going to cd into short URL and open it in VS Code. Then I'm going to create a deps.edn file and just put it in a blank map. Save this. This will get Clojure going and create some files. Then I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to create it in a directory called source, and inside of that I'm going to create a directory called short URL, and then I'm going to add call.clj. Cool. And I'm going to go back to deps.edn and I'm going to add a path, and that path is going to be source. Awesome. So the first thing we need to do is actually add Clojure as a dependency to this project. So I'm going to go deps and add a map here. And then we can go org.clojure/Clojure. And then we need the Maven version. So that's nvn/version. And that'll be 1.10.0. Rad. So the first aspect of this project that I'd like to work on is getting a database up and running, and then connecting to that database, and then querying that database, as well as inserting data into that database. So let's do that. I'm going to create a new file here inside of short URL. I'm going to call it db.clj and save this. And I'm going to use PlanetScale to spin up a free database, which you can do. So I'm going to go to my PlanetScale account. I think it's open here. Cool. And let's go down the road here and create a database. I'm going to call it short URL and I'm going to create it in ThankFit. Create database. This is super quick. Cool. Then I'm going to wait for that to initialize and click connect. Then I'm going to grab the connection data and just add that as a comment here. So now we need to actually connect to this. So what I want to do is use the JDBC library as well as a MySQL connector. Go to the GitHub repo and then we can copy the dependency here. Where is it? Here we go. Just copy this and let's paste it in our deps.edn file. And then if we go down here a little bit, we can see we need to connect to MySQL. So I'm going to get that link, and here we can get the drivers. So let's click on this. I'll click on this group ID. Then click on the connector. Okay, we're just going in a loop here. Got to this page. Where is it? Okay, we can copy this line again, dependency, and it's just converted to a deps.edn dependency. So to do that, we just get rid of the vector. And we wrap this in a map and we give it the key a Maven version. So that's all we actually need to connect to our database. So let's go back to our db.clj file and let's connect to it. So if we go back to that JDBC Git repo, I think there's some example code. Yeah, exactly. Cool. So let's copy this definition MySQL DB type MySQL, yep, DB name, that's going to be short URL. So I'm going to copy this. User, that's this. Password, that's this. And then we need a host. So I'm just going to copy this host and I'm going to add a new key here. I'm just going to call it host and pass that through. Cool, so now we have our credentials. We can actually get rid of this. And let's see how we connect. So if we go down here, cool, to query, we can just copy this. And let's try execute. Well, actually, let's create a table that we can query from. So I'm going to go back to PlanetScale. close this, click on branches, click on main, then I'm going to click on console. And inside console, we can actually execute queries. So here I'll just create a table. So to do that, I'm going to run create table, and I'm going to call this table redirects, and open some brackets. And inside here, we'll have a slug, and the slug will be our primary key, and it can't be null. Oh wait, and it also has to be a varchar. And let's make it 10 characters long, even though we won't use the full 10 characters. And let's create a URL that will also be a varchar, and it'll be, say, 1,000 characters long, and it can't be null, so not null. Execute this. Cool. Now we should be able to select all from redirects, and it should be empty. Oh, need a semicolon. Awesome. Cool. So now we have a table. Let's go back to VS Code, and from here we can select all from redirects. We don't need this. Save this. This needs, close this off. And let's actually run a REPL. So Clojure start a project REPL, connect to deps.edn. Cool, our REPL started. Now I can load this namespace, load this database definition, and let's see if we can query this. Okay, we're not importing J. Let's go back to the library GitHub page and see what J refers to, and it's just JDBC. So let's just copy this, and we'll require it at the top here. So require, pass through this, and let's evaluate this again. Now we should be able to query some data. Execution error, create SQL exception. And that's because we need a from here. Cool, we should get nothing back. Awesome, okay. So let's actually use another library called HoneySQL, and that will allow us to create SQL queries using Clojure in a really cool way. If we go here, go to this GitHub page, and let's look for the dependency. Let's copy this, copy this, go to our deps.edn file, and let's paste that in here, save it. Then let's go back and require it. So yeah, I think we need to require, I'm just going to require all the helpers, and that has like these select statements and that kind of thing. So let's go helpers, referrer, and that's all. So we'll get all of the functions in that namespace. And I think we also need this SQL import. So let's add that. And we probably have to just restart our REPL to get those libraries in the project. Close this, reevaluate this. And now instead of going select all from redirects, we should be able to go, how does this look actually? Yeah, select, okay, let's just copy this here. So let's just execute this to see what we get. So I think this creates the select map, and then to actually convert it to a query, you go SQL/format. Yeah, and it creates the select there. So we'll have select all from redirects where we won't have a where. Cool, and we'll have select all from redirects. And that's what we'll put inside of our query. And just see if this works. It doesn't. Oh, and that's because we restarted our REPL. So we need to reevaluate this, and we should get nothing back. Awesome. So let's create a query function. So I want to define a function here called query, and it takes in a query, and basically it will run this. So I'm just going to cut this, and instead of executing this, it'll execute this with the query. And let's just neaten this up. Evaluate this, and let's create a comment. And basically these comment functions don't get evaluated when the file loads, so you can just create little tests for your functions. So let's test query here. And with query, we want to test the select again. And if we evaluate this, we should get nothing again. Cool, so that's nice. Now let's look at a way that we can create an insert. So I'm going to define a new function here. And I'm going to call it insert. And it's also going to take a query. And how this can run is, let's go J. I think it'll have, db do prepared. And we'll need to pass through our MySQL DB and execute Q. Evaluate this, and let's create an insert query. So insert, and let's actually look here at how to do an insert statement. So I'm just going to search for inserts. I'm just going to copy this. Cool, so we want to insert into redirects. Columns will be slug and URL. And we don't need age. Values, let's for now, we'll have like ABC. And let's get a URL that's pointed to this URL. And get rid of these. And we don't need to make it pretty. Let's test the insert. So let's evaluate this. Cool. We get a 1 back, which I assume means everything went cool. And let's query and double check that everything did go well. Yeah, and we have our first row. So I also want to now, let's create, like normally I have like a model file or something, but I want to do it all in here because it's a pretty simple project. I'm just going to define a function to basically insert a redirect and then to query a redirect by a slug. So let's define a function called insert redirect, and I'm just adding these exclamation marks because these functions have side effects. So this will take a slug and a URL, and we'll basically run this. So I'm going to copy this, and it'll, instead of having this, it'll have a slug. And here will be our URL. Cool, and if we evaluate this, we can now do another function check here, insert redirect, and the slug will be, let's say, XYZ, and let's get another, we'll use this URL as this URL here, and let's see if this works. Evaluate this. Cool, looks like it worked, and let's check if we have 2 rows here. So that's the first one. I think it might be there, we're just not seeing it. Let's open our output. Yeah, so it's here. Okay, cool. So now we've connected to our database, we can insert redirects and we can query redirects, but we can't query a specific slug. So let's create a function for that. So defn, let's see, get URL. And this will take a slug, and we'll query. So let's query. So let's copy this. Cool. So we'll query from redirects, but we need a where clause. So I'm going to go where, and to do that, we can go is equal to. My video recorder is making this highlight when I press equals. Oh my goodness. Okay, let's just go copy an equals statement from here. So let's copy this equals line. Okay, so where slug is equal to our slug. So let's evaluate this function and let's just check it out here. I'm gonna go get URL and we'll pass through our slug, which would be, let's say XYZ. And now we should, okay, we get the whole row. So we just want to get the URL out of this row, and I can see that this row is returned inside of a list. So here what we can do is we can wrap this with a thread macro, and then we can get the first one out of this list first, and that will just return this without the list because we're getting basically the first element. And I think this is in the wrong place. Yep, now it's in the right place. Reevaluate this function. Reevaluate this. Cool, so now it's out of a list and we just have our one record. And let's just grab from that the URL. So let's reevaluate this and run this again. Cool, and now we're just getting the URL. So basically the threading macro is getting information like this. So we have a vector with a map and there's a URL, and this could be, let's say, our URL. Then what it's doing is it's getting the first element from that URL, which would be the first map. So if we run this, it'll just return this. So we could have like, multiple maps in here. We could say A, B, and if we rerun this, we'll still just get this first map. Then we basically using the keyword as a function here. So like if we grab this map and we just ran URL on here, we'd get our URL, because keyword function is basically the same as like get from our map the URL key. It's just a shorthand. This vector gets passed through to the first function, which returns us this map, and then URL executes on that map and returns us the value for URL from that map. So let's just test this out. We have a database working. Awesome. So now what we need to do is create a server with some endpoints to, well, one, insert a record, and two, actually do the redirect. So let's do that. So what I'm going to do here is actually go to my YouTube channel. 2,000 subs, not so bad. Videos, cool. I made a video with Alan about creating an API. So let's just go to that repo. I think I'm just going to copy the libraries that we used there. So let's just copy all of this and go to our devs.edn file and just paste it in. And okay, so this obviously won't work like this. There's actually another cool tool that we can use to fix this up. It's called Depsy, and it's a cool project where you can just like paste project.clj dependencies, wrap this in a vector, and it'll return you them as the deps version. So let's copy this out and paste it in here, and just get rid of this deps key and this map, and let's format it so it doesn't look gross. And now it should format nicely. Cool. And for ring, we just need to go ring/ring. And those are the dependencies that we need. And let's start our ring server. So I'm going to go back to our core.clj file, and this is going to be basically where we start the server and where we have our routes and our handlers. So the first thing I want to do is let's figure out how we create a server. So I'm going to go back to this repo. I'm actually going to paste this repo here to make it easy. And we can go to source, core, and let's just copy the server part and this app part. Cool, well, let's require ring. So we go require, and let's just see where this require is. We'll just copy all these require statements. And evaluate this, and it doesn't work because we need to restart our REPL. So restart the REPL. Started, and now we can evaluate this, and we'll have all of these dependencies in this file. Cool, so I don't want any of these handlers. Cool, I'm just going to create a handler here, and this handler will basically give us a function. The function takes in a request, and we need to return a response. So the body will be hello, and the status will be 200. Cool, so now that will go to /blank, and let's evaluate this app. Cool, and running run jetty app actually returns us a server, and I'm going to define that server in our project. Server will be the evaluation of start, and the reason I'm doing this is so that we can stop the server if we want to. And if you make this a symbol like this, then we don't have to keep on restarting our REPL. So let's evaluate this. If we evaluate this now, okay, we have a problem. Bind exception. Okay, it's because I'm already using port 3000. So let's stop server. Does that work? I'm going to make this run at port 3001. Evaluate this. Start our server. And now if we go to, we can actually test this all inside of VS Code. I'm going to use an extension here called Rapid API. Let's download it. Now we should have a thing here, Rapid API. And now what we can do is create a new request. So just plus here. And if we go to localhost 3001, I think we might need the HTTP here. And cool, we get our string of hello returned. Awesome. First things first, maybe let's start with the redirection, because that's going to be a simple GET request. So let's create a handler here called redirect. And that's going to take in the request. And from that request, we basically want the slug. So we're going to have a path here of a slug. So to make that dynamic, we just use a colon and you can call it slug, and it will end with a trailing slash. And this will run this redirect handler. So let's run redirect. And for now, let's just copy this here and let's see if it works. Evaluate this, evaluate this. Well, let's make this say something else. It'll say hello 2. And then we don't need to restart the server, I don't think. Let's create a new request. And here we go, HTTP. We'll go to localhost 3001. And we'll go to ABC /. We get 200 back. Doesn't look like it worked. Let's go back to core. Let's stop the server and start it again. Let's do the request. Check the response. Let's just check the other request works. Hello. Let's change this to like hello 2. Rerun this. Okay, that worked. Why is this not working? Let's check. Okay, so I can see why. It's because we just need to return this body, not the whole thing. So let's evaluate this, go back to request 2, put in ABC as the slug, run this, and we should get hello 2. Go back here, and now what we want to do is actually get the slug from that request. So to do that, we'll create a let binding. And these path params are actually available inside of the request. So we can bind the slug variable to, if we get in our request, I think it's going to be inside path params like this. And then we'll get the slug out. And let's just actually return that. So instead of doing these responses ourselves, there's actually a utility we can use, and we can import from ring.util.response. We can import this as R, evaluate this. Now we can return this. So response, and we'll just add the slug here. So if we evaluate this, go back to request 2, this hello 2 should now be ABC, and it's not. So let's see why. Let's evaluate this again. So here. Cool, okay, it's ABC. Awesome. So now we have our slug. We just need to perform the redirect. So let's go back to core, and we can easily do that redirect by getting the URL, and we just need to import our DB namespace. So we can go from short URL.db, import this as DB, and here we can execute DB get URL, and we pass through our slug, and then here we can run redirect with the slug. But let's actually we can check if there is a URL, then we can run the redirect. If there isn't, we can return not found, and we'll just say not found. Let's evaluate this, and there's a problem. Oh, I think the problem is we didn't evaluate this namespace. So let's do that. Now we should be able to evaluate this. With this redirect, we can actually also pass through a status. I'm going to pass through 307 as a temporary redirect, just so we don't cache anything. We're redirecting to the slug. Obviously, that's not going to work. So we need to redirect to the URL. Let's evaluate this. I think we also need to reevaluate this app. Now it should work. Awesome. Cool. So let's look at creating a post request to insert a redirect record. So I'm just going to get rid of, well, instead of this saying hello to, I'm just going to say, let's create redirect screen. Here, let's create an API endpoint. So I'm going to create an API route. And here, I'm going to create a new route called redirect. And it will accept a post request. And for now, let's just copy paste this. And we'll say in the body, we'll return post so that we know that this handler is at least working. And let's just add a trailing slash, evaluate this, go to Rapid API, we'll create a new request, HTTP, localhost 3001, and /API /redirect we'll do a post request. Let's add some data here. So in the body, let's add some JSON, and basically all we need to add is, oh my God, I'm just going to zoom out so that I can at least see what I'm doing. Add URL, and the URL, let's grab a URL. We'll use this depc GitHub repo as our URL, and let's send this through to our API. Cool. So the post request is working. Well, at least our endpoint is working. Let's now create a handler that will create a new redirect in our table. So I'm going to define create redirect handler, and this is going to take in our request. And the first thing we need to do is get that URL out. So let's create a let binding, and the URL will map to, we can go get in our request. So the path params are added in this path params key inside the request map. The post params are added to a body. I think it's called, what is it called? Maybe it'll autocomplete. Body params. Body params, and we want to get the URL out. And then what we want to do is we actually want to create that slug. So let's go slug here. Let's create a new namespace to create the slug. So I'm going to create a new file here. I'm going to call it slug.clj. This slug is just going to consist of, well, let's make it like uppercase characters. So let's define the alphabet. So char set. I'm on a B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, X, Y, Z. Cool. So essentially what I want to do is just pick 4 random characters from this character set, and that's our slug. So I'm going to create a function here called generate slug. What I want to do is, let's create a comment here. I want to get a random character. So to do that, we can go rand nth on the char set, and that will, I have to evaluate this namespace maybe. Yeah, this will always return us a random character. But now I want 4 random characters. So what we could do is we could take 4 from repeatedly running rand nth char set. I think this will work. Oh, this has to be inside of a function, and I think this will work. Cool, now we get 4 characters. So basically what's happening here is this repeatedly is just generating, I think I can run that by itself. Just grab it out and run it. You can use Clojure to just run this independently, but I want to just make it a thing here. And if we go check our output, yeah, it's just going to repeatedly make a long list of characters. Let's go back there. And it's a lazy sequence, so we don't have to worry about how much memory it takes up. Now we're getting them as characters. We want them as like a joined string. So this is a list of characters. So we need to run this on apply string. Cool. And what apply string does is basically it takes our list of characters and it makes them arguments to strings so that they're individual arguments instead of a list of characters. Let's write that a bit nicer. So we can actually thread that. So we can run this, repeatedly create the list of random characters. And then from this, we want to take 4. So we'll take 4 of those. Then we want to run apply string to convert them into a string. So if we evaluate this here and then run generate slug, cool, we get our slug. Easy peasy. Let's go back to core and let's run that here. We need to first import it. So short url.slug. Let's refer to the generate slug function, and then we can run generate slug, and then we have those functions that we created in the DB namespace so we insert it. So DB insert redirect, and that takes a slug and a URL, and then we can return a response. So we'll just say response created slug. Well, let's make this a string. Created slug, and that will be our slug. Evaluate this, and there's a problem, and that's because str should be lowercase. And there's more problems, and I don't know why. Let's see, output. Unable to resolve symbol generate slug, and that's because we need to evaluate this. And then we can evaluate this. And then here, instead of this handler, we can just use our create redirect handler. Evaluate this. And let's go back to our post request. And let's make this smaller. Run send. Cool, so now we have a slug generated, ZQCV. Paste that slug in here. And it should redirect us to depc. Cool, and that's it. Actually, there is one other thing that I'm going to add in now before we end the video. And that's going to be using, let's go back here. I want to use environment variables to store our database credentials, not just hard code them like this. So let's do that. I'm not going to use a library. I want to show that you can actually do this yourself. So I'm going to go into our folder, into our source directory, and create a new file here. I'm going to call it env.clj. And yeah, let's look at how we can actually do this ourselves. To get environment variables in Clojure, you can use system/get env and pass through an environment variable name. So like home. This is one that I just have on my system. Basically, I want to create new ones. So the first one I want to create is, well, all of these. Host, I'm going to just copy this map here and create a new file. And I'm going to put this in an EDN file called, let's say, env.edn. Paste this, and let's make these uppercase. Let's go back to our env file. Let's load that map into a variable. So I'm going to define a variable here. I'm going to call it, let's call it env_vars. And to load an env file, it's actually really easy. We can just slurp env.edn. And then to pass this file, we can go Clojure.edn/read string. And now if we evaluate this, and let's just print out what env_vars contains, it's the map of those environment variables. So let's make a env function. I'm just going to create a comment block here. Let's create a function here called env, and it takes in a key. And let's say it first tries our env_vars. If it's there, then cool, it returns that one. If it's not there, then it tries to get it from our system. Get the key. So it expects to take a key like this. So we expect something like env, sorry, let's say host. So we can get the key from our env_vars. If we evaluate this, now we'll get host. But if we run this, it's going to return nil, but I want it to actually return this home directory. So what we can do is we can wrap this in an OR. So first try is to get this, otherwise it'll return this. So if we just return, let's say, hey here, now we're going to get hey, because this is nil, so it returns this. But we can actually run system get env key, but now this key is going to be shaped as a keyword. So it's going to look like this. And that's not going to work. We need it to be a string. So we can easily get around that by wrapping this in name, because if we run name on a keyword, let's say home, it's just going to return the string value of it. So if we evaluate this and then run env home, we'll get our home directory. And that's how we can create env vars. So let's go back to DB and replace these with our environment variables. So let's import from short url.env, and let's refer to the env function, evaluate this, and let's get env host. Well, this we can actually keep hard-coded as MySQL. Let's go env db name, env user, and env password. Cool, let's evaluate this and let's check our MySQL credentials, which are very secret, and it still works. Cool, so now we're using env variables. Cool, so now I'm actually done with this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the next one, I want to create a front end for this application, so you can just paste in the URL you want to create a short URL for, and then it will return that short URL on the front end. See you in the next one. Bye guys.